short story collections by Claudia Ulloa Donoso, Little Bird and Ice for Martians. Her stories and translations can be found in many publications, including the Sewanee Review and the Southern Review. Her essays and criticism appear in outlets including Book Forum, The Nation, The New Yorker, The New York Times Book Review, and The Atlantic. This afternoon, she will be talking about her debut novel, Short War, a coming-of-age narrative that also confronts the legacy of American imperialism in South America. It is a powerful story about guilt and power. And because this, I usually read a blurb from someone, and I'm going to use Gina Apostol because she's a writer that Lily and I bond over. She says that Short War blazes a pathway for the contemporary novel. It is bittersweet and sexy, a melancholy fable of trauma, of fascism that is both an American story and a transnational grief. What a gift to have storytellers like Lily on the rise now. Lily will be in conversation with Vanessa B. Vanessa is a consumer protection lawyer interested in inequality and corporate power, a memoir writer, and an essayist. Her nonfiction has appeared in, among others, Harper's Bazaar, The Nation, Guernica, and N+1, where she received a notable essays mention in the Best American Essays of 2022. Everyone, let us all welcome Lily Meyer and Vanessa B.
Now, if they're going away before I can hug you. Oh my God, thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Bernard. Thank you. I mean, if I thank everyone, then the event will be over, which maybe I should do that. That would be great. Thank you especially to P&P, my former workplace. Thank you extra to Liz and Jonathan, my events colleagues who made P&P for me and who are both here. Thank you to every bookseller working tonight, everyone in web orders who did the pre-orders. Thank you so much to the event staff. Please, everyone, hold up your chairs for them.
It's such an honor to get to take part in your launch. I love the Short War. I have so many questions for you that I've been saving up all this time. But if you could maybe get us started with a passage from a Short War, and then we can chat afterwards.
I would love to do that. When I find my passage. So I'm going to read you the end of one scene and then into another. What you need to know is we are in Buenos Aires. It's 2015. We're with a woman named Nina who, she's in her late 20s. She's a grad student at AU. Her PhD is going pretty badly. And she has tried to rescue it by going to Buenos Aires to write about protest movements springing up in the wake of the death of a lawyer named Alberto Nisman, who, if you remember that scandal, great. If you do not, it's fine. Just associate the word Nisman with scandal and protest. And the first section of the book is about a kid named Gabriel who turns into Nina's dad. Oh, did I say this? Nina's on a date in this scene with a guy named Elon. Nina and Elon sat at their little table long after their ice creams and the espressos that followed were gone. He was full of ideas for leisure time activities, museums to visit, neighborhoods to wander, restaurants to eat in, books to read. Nina tried and failed to resist being charmed by the associative depth of his suggestions. An indie film set in Montevideo reminded him of a book called Guerra Eterna, written by a Uruguayan Jew who was basically Elena Ferrante before Ferrante herself was, that Nina had to read. It was a classic. And speaking of, if she wanted to read classic Uruguayan writers, she should seek out the Eduardo Galeano books published by Siglo XXI Editores, which had a gorgeous office bookstore in Palermo, Soho. Not, incidentally, his favorite neighborhood, but it did have terrific booksticks. After recommendations, they moved on to academic gossip. Elon was extremely willing to make fun of Vice Cooper, Nina's advisor, who she'd gotten stuck with after her first advisor went to teach at NYU. He was Nina's enemy. He rejected her core belief in connection. Nina felt that the true purpose of studying was to learn to pay real, sustained attention to others. Cooper thought that it was to win tenure and publish in prestigious journals. He thought scholars should be aloof and dispassionate and not have Twitter accounts. Nina thought he was a Luddite, a misogynist, and a Grinch. One of her major reasons for continuing in her program was that quitting would please him too much. She fully intended to spite graduate, she said, which was true and also made Elon laugh. Oh, Elon also went to her part of AU. To stem aggravating thoughts of Cooper, she asked how Elon had liked D.C. He and Nina, it turned out, shared a favorite bar, the Red Derby, which was 2 doors down from her apartment. While discussing the district's restaurants, he pried from her the knowledge that she couldn't cook beyond eggs and pasta, and demanded that she come over for dinner before she got scurvy. She couldn't quite gauge the nature of the invite, but the mere thought of entering his apartment sent a prickle of heat down her spine. On her half-block walk home, she told herself to hope maybe Elon was gay. She felt in her bones that he was not, but also that if he was straight, she could get herself in big trouble. Heartbreak trouble, or worse, step-maternal trouble. Already she was imagining ways she might charm his daughter. Contrary to parental stereotype, Elon hadn't shown Nina a single photo. She wondered if they looked alike. In her building's echoing staircase, Nina tried to remember herself at 5, the daughter's age. She remembered loving in descending order her dad, Scottie Pippen, and God, who she thought lived in trees. In playgrounds and parks, she'd shove her face into knotholes and root balls, braced to stare the god of her ancestors down. Eventually she got poison oak on her forehead and renounced her search, and with it her theological interests. She never lost interest in Scottie, though. She wondered if her religious sureness had been a kid thing or if it was her personality. Until her PhD, she had always been highly confident. She still felt that confidence operating below the surface of her mind, but her 3 failed case studies, combined with Cooper's scorn for her project, had done major damage. Once, Nina had been positive that studying social media's political potential was her calling, her purpose. She had all kinds of lofty ideals about the public benefits of researching internet dissent. Now she worried that her entire academic life was an excuse to dick around on Twitter instead of doing real 9-to-5 work. On the plane here, plunging through the dark sky over Brazil, Nina had promised herself that this was it. She was in the 5th year of her PhD, and now she was on her 5th possible dissertation subject. If the Nixon alerts failed to cohere into the movement she predicted and hoped for, she would take it as a cosmic alert that her work was misguided. She would admit that she was not a serious scholar, that her whole research agenda was baseless bullshit. She'd pack up and go home, and not home to D.C. either, but to Chicago. She'd admit defeat. She'd get a job. Nina had been considering moving back to Chicago for months. She had no real desire to live there, but she was worried about her dad. In April, he downsized from Nina's suburban childhood home to a sunny, narrow townhouse in Lincoln Park. In the spring, his choice had struck Nina as a good sign, an indicator of renewed interest in the city and its social and cultural life. The 8 months after moving, he hadn't unpacked. His books, ordinarily his main companions, were still in their disintegrating cardboard boxes. His art leaned on the living room walls, swaddled in bubble wrap and brown paper. 1 pot and 1 pan sat on the stove, but his beloved Dutch ovens were nowhere in sight. Nina knew the patterns of her father's depression. She understood that disruptions to routine often triggered dark times. Her departure from college had been a rough one. Nina had needed not only to badger him back into therapy, but find a therapist herself to deal with the guilt and terror of having left him alone. She should have been warier of the Lincoln Park move. She shouldn't have let herself be fooled by his supposed desire to get out more, or by his cheeriness when he came to D.C. in October. He always seemed happy when he visited her. On the bright side, when she expressed concern, he told the truth. He said he wasn't in great shape, but he was handling the situation, seeing his doctor, taking his meds, talking to his friend Nico every weekend. He didn't protest when Nina rebooked her return ticket for the Saturday before her semester started and started filling his cabinets and shelves. Her college shrink would have said she was choosing more responsibility than was healthy, but what else could she do? It was still a nice visit. She and her dad went to the Art Institute and, as was their inexplicable Hanukkah tradition, visited the turtles at the shed aquarium. On Christmas Eve, her dad made bolognese in his freshly unpacked kitchen, and on Christmas itself, they constructed a lasagna that, once baked and cut, had zero structural integrity, but was delicious nonetheless. They watched movies, Skyped Nico, drank fancy scotch. Nina even persuaded her dad to let him take him shopping right before New Year's. Some of his khakis seemed to be growing moss. On the way home from Brooks Brothers, Nina caught her dad quietly singing along with the Bob Dylan CD in the car. When she joined in, he sang louder. At home, he suggested that they take an afternoon walk. Lincoln Park was quiet in the pre-New Year's haze. Christmas lights still blinked from bushes, and flyers in bar windows advertised coat drives, turkey donations, Santa project for homeless elementary school kids. Nina had always liked Lincoln Park's neat brownstones, its farmers market, its view of the lake. It was much fancier than her neighborhood in D.C., but the rental market was standard here by far. She bet she could find an apartment here for 3/4 the price of her current one. It would probably be bigger, too. She had finished her PhD from Chicago. Before the anti-Zionists that she had been studying disbanded, her work had briefly been promising enough to earn her a dissertation writing fellowship, which meant she had no campus job to show up for and could therefore move back, see her dad daily, find some Chicago activists to study. One morning, she woke to hear her father whistling in the kitchen, and before she even got out of bed, she started drafting an email telling Cooper she wanted to experiment with remote studentship. If she had sent the email or mentioned her plan to her dad, she would have ignored the Nixon news, which broke a week before Nina was meant to fly back to D.C. She had yet to decide whether she was returning to pack and sublet her apartment or to resume the normal flow of her days. She hadn't opened her dissertation in weeks. She had no idea who she was going to study now that her anti-Zionists were gone. As she scanned the New York Times account of Niesman's death, research questions flooded into her head. Methodology unfurled before her. She consulted Twitter, solidarity everywhere, plans for action, hashtags begetting communities. Her hands warmed with excitement. An entirely new protest movement demanding transparency about not only his death, but also the government's role in hiding Iran's responsibility for the Amia bombing he'd been investigating. It was a potentially perfect case study, and one that she, with her proficient Spanish, her bachelor's degree in Latin American history, and her total lack of on-campus commitments, was extremely well-positioned to take advantage of. Hazel, Nina's best friend, thought her idea was brilliant. Her second dissertation reader thought it was risky but had enormous potential, and her enemy, Cooper, conceded that it could, as he put it in his Flemish baritone work. Nina herself felt a level of purposeful enthusiasm that she nearly had forgotten she could muster. It's like academic cocaine. She couldn't type fast enough to keep up with herself. She dug out the Argentine history and political theory she'd read in undergrad, tapped her feet as she took screenshots to use as primary sources, bounced up at night to record new background questions she needed to investigate. She slowed down only when she thought about telling her dad. Nina had never traveled where her father would not go. She knew how ashamed he was that he couldn't bring himself to return to Chile or even to the southern hemisphere. Before she was born, he had been heavily involved in the U.S.'s anti-Pinochet solidarity movement. In 1990, when Pinochet finally slithered from the presidential palace, Nina's dad skipped his fellow activist Victoria's return to Santiago. To this day, he'd never visited Nico, never seen his friend Andres' hollow-cheeked portrait in the Museo de la Memoria. When his family's old housekeeper Luz died of pancreatic cancer in 2010, he booked a ticket, called Nico, swore up and down he'd be at the funeral. Nina, who was home for the summer, drove him to O'Hare herself. An hour later, she looked out the window to see him hauling his suitcase from a taxi truck. All right, now you've met Gabriel and Nina.
I really like the passage you read. It's so characteristic of the rest of the book, which deals with these really big, serious themes, but also has a lot of humor in it and hope. I love that Nina's version of defeat is getting a job that is so relatable. It's just a wonderful book all around. I want to start with the title, Short War. What is that about? How did you land on that title? And also, as you were writing it, was it always the title in your head, or did you have to arrive there?
I always knew that I wanted to write something called Short War, because in the book, Short War is the family's toast. Instead of cheers, they say short war. This is also my family's toast. Instead of cheers, we say short war, and I stole it, therefore ruining it for It just sounds so good. I can't remember when in the process of writing I decided that this was the book to use short war for, but there's a lot of tension in the book between the phrases short war and eternal war, and that became something fun for me to work with.
So Short War is divided into 3 connected sections, and in each part we meet a few different characters at different pivotal moments in their lives. And so we have Gabriel Lazris, who is a high schooler in Chile when you meet him. I keep calling him Gabe in my head, which I feel like he wouldn't like, but I just don't know how to help it. And then we meet Nina, his daughter, as she, is it fair to say that she's floating aimlessly in her PhD program?
Floundering horribly, struggling deeply.
She's having a time. And then there's a third mystery character that I don't want to spoil because that third section is so special and also just so surprising. So I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read the book. And then of course there's a cast of people that are like their support system, their nemesis. So what I want to know first is which character came to you first as you were reading?
This book had many, many bad forms before it settled into this one, and the character who actually came first is, I briefly mentioned when I read a book called Guerra Eterna, which does not exist in real life. It does exist in the book. Its author, the Ferrante-esque figure, is a woman named, her pseudonym is Graciela Brechner. She's Uruguayan. She was the first character, actually, and I wrote easily 100 pages about her before making her a fake person who doesn't exist. But Gabriel didn't know that.
That is not the answer I expected at all. You have to choose which of the characters is your favorite and which maybe is most like you, or which you relate to the most.
Gabriel, 100%.
Can you say more about that? Where is that depressed dad energy?
I relate to Gabriel as a teenager. Gabriel is a very idealistic teenager. He really wants to be sort of a socialist hero of the new left in Chile. Gabriel really just wants to get out of his own body and into somebody else's. He's just very existentially uneasy. And I think that existential unease, that's how I was as a teenager, and to some degree that's how I still am. I think that's why I write fiction. So I feel connected to that.
One thing that makes short war great, is the fact that, it's not just about one thing, it's about so many themes at once, which is what I think a lot of great novels do well, and that you do well. And so I'd like to talk about some of these ideas a bit. The big one, of course, is politics, right? Like idealism versus realism. There's a lot of responsibility and guilt. There's power, left versus right. And some of these issues are obviously baked in the times that the characters are living in, and then some are just like a part of their core. They're just things that they have to think about and grapple with. So I'm curious, do you think of this novel as political, and did you set out to write about politics in the way you did?
100% yes. Very much intended for it to be a political novel, really wanted it to be a political novel. I am constantly frustrated by how few novels are willing to engage with politics, given that I'm from here, and you all know me and my family and my life. You know that talking about politics is... I don't know about people who don't talk about politics. It's confusing to me when, for example, some of the poets in my PhD program did not follow the presidential election, let's say. I find that inaccessible existentially. It's frustrating to me that in a lot of fiction, people just don't talk about politics at all, and I really wanted to write against that. Also, I came into the story with a political agenda. The reason that I wrote this book is that I hate that I just literally now saw my high school history teacher. Hello, Richard. Yeah, Richard, you are great and a fabulous teacher. However, I do not like that in American history classes, we are not taught about CIA involvement in Chile and in Latin America as a central part of the history of the United States. I think that's a political problem. And that's why I wrote the book. Don't, Richard, don't.
It's very clear when you read the novel that, unless you as a person had all that information, which you write about in great detail, downloaded in your brain, that a lot of research must have gone into it, particularly in the first part where you talk a lot about what is going on a day-to-day basis in, the last weeks, months of the Allende regime. Can you shed a little light on your research process and sort of how long it took you to even get to a place where you could write the novel?
Well, I was always writing. I was just writing bad drafts of this novel for years and years, while also doing what was in the end, I think, 7 years of research. My parents were great research assistants. My brother was a great research assistant. They went to Chile with me. But I read so much. You can't read a lot about this period actually in English. So I read a lot in Spanish. So I started buying books on crazy websites that took 5 months to get here. I read, so my friend Greg's uncle, Pierre Kornblue, runs the National Security Archives project on Chile that has declassified all of these documents pertaining to CIA intervention in Chile. I read many declassified documents. I mean, you work for the government, you're a lawyer, you know, declassified doesn't necessarily mean, there were still whole chunks of text that were gone, but I tried to guess what was under there. I also was really lucky to get to interview a lot of people, some of whom are in here. But luckiest, by freak coincidence, my best friend from college's mother was a high school student in Chile in 1973. Her father, who's a professor, was on a sabbatical there. And she and her brother talked to me many times. They told me, the reason I know what drugs they were doing at rich kid parties in Santiago in 1973 is because of my friend Maddie's mother and uncle. Thank you, Annie and Tony.
That's so impressive. But also truly in terms of the research, and we feel it when we read the book. It makes everything feel more palpable, more real. I felt like I was reading about people that, have walked this earth. Something that stood out to me as I was reading is that in the very first pages, after you introduce Gabriel, and sorry, my first language is French, so every once in a while it sort of comes out. So we meet Gabriel, and it's a pivotal moment in his life because he's about to meet someone very important to him, Caro. And you tell us right away that something bad is going to happen to Caro, and something bad is going to happen to the country. When we first meet Nina, you also tell us pretty quickly that she is about to meet her husband, right? And then you sort of walk us through the process. And some writers, might approach these events by sort of being coy about it. Even though there are lots of spoilers about what happens to it the other day, she's taking over, and they might still write it as will the kingdom fall or not, right? You can just go on Wikipedia. And you choose not to hide the ball. Can you talk about that choice?
That is a great question. Thank you. I'm happy you asked that question. Different reasons for those two choices. So starting the book by saying, basically, guess what? There's going to be a coup. It's going to be terrible. I did to set in the mood. I did not want readers to think they were coming into exclusively a high school romance, although it is very much a high school romance. I wanted a sense of ominousness there from the beginning, and I wanted it to be clear that the book's stakes were political from the beginning. Starting the second section by saying Nina's going to meet her husband, that's just a red herring. There's a mystery that begins in the second section of the book that I would like readers to be surprised by. So I thought I can lead with this husband thing. Sort of the reverse, actually. Lead with the husband to not signal the ominous stuff or the complicated stuff or the historical stuff that will, in fact, take up the bulk of the Nina section.
I gotta say, when I read the book, it sort of reminded me of certain prestige TV shows that will set up a problem, and it's the kind of problem that you could solve over a whole season, and they'll solve it in 10 minutes. And then it opens up possibilities. I'm so this show is actually, it has to be about something else. And I felt like your book did that as well. It just sort of made it really obvious that the book was going to be about something else than just a specific romance or just this person Nina meets. And it met those expectations, and so it was very cool. So Jewishness is a part of this novel as well. Several other characters have a complicated relationship to their identity as people in the Americas, as people with connections or roots to an empire that like participated in a real like who's who of atrocities of the 20th century and like maybe the 21st century. Just goes on. And so I thought that was really interesting. And then I read this quote from an essay that you recently published in Lit Hub, and I want to ask you about it. So you write, in two short, sad stories from a long and happy life, Grace, Polly's fictional avatar Faith, tells her ex-husband that, quote, Jews have one hope only, to remain a remnant in the basin of world affairs. No, I mean something else, a splinter in the toe of civilizations. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that Polly quote, and if you'd be willing to say a little more about what you were thinking as you incorporated Jewishness into the novel.
Yeah, I love that you asked about that quote, because the way I wanted to write that essay, the whole thing was wrestling with that quote, but that was sadly not, in fact, the essay I pitched to Lit Hub. So on the one hand, I love Grace Paley. She's one of the great Jewish American writers, and she wrote out of this keen sense of Jews as outsiders who were obligated to fight with and fight with other outsiders in America and throughout the world. And that's her sense of being a splinter motivated that fight. And on the one hand, I agree with that, I'm motivated by that, I aspire to that. On the other hand, I don't know that Jews should feel like a splinter in the U.S., both because white Jews have assimilated here extremely successfully, been very successful here, where white Jews are very safe and lucky here a lot of the time. But also there have been Jews in the Americas since the Americas started to be colonized. The Jewish diaspora here goes here in the Americas, which part of Short War is about thinking about the Americas as well as the United States. There have been Jews in the Americas since the 1600s. So are we a splinter, or do we actually really belong here? I think that's something the reason I made Short War sort of Jew forward, can I? Oh, no, there is a Jewish forward. That's like one of the conservative ones, I think. Anyway, while Vanessa gets her mic's head, I will say just that the reason I made Short War so Jewish was I really wanted to interrogate this question of, is it true that Jews are outsiders here? And if not, then how do American Jews take responsibility for America's crimes? How can we use a Jewish lens to not duck taking responsibility, I guess is a better way of saying it, for things like the Pinochet coup.
Yeah, and it was interesting, you introduced that identity in so many ways, right? Like, Nina and Elon have Jewish identity in common, but like, do they? Her relationship to it is so different than his, and his own is so complex. He's both in, he's like visibly in, but then if you sort of ask him about it, he's like a little more out. And then the fact that they grew up in, North America versus South America is, I almost wonder if that's like the biggest cultural divide, It's, it's really interesting.
Yeah, so Elon is a sort of a lapsed Orthodox Argentine Jew. My brother, actually, when he read the book, was like, do you have a secret, Orthodox fetish? He was really alarmed by that. But no, I really wanted to bring out the many kinds of Jewishness in the Americas in the book. And by making Elon an Argentine Orthodox Jew, I could do that. The answer is no, to be clear.
And fetish. That's on the record. Okay, so you mentioned, it actually came out a little bit in the passage that you read, and I shared this to you personally before, but I love that like a non-trivial amount of the book is set in DC, and in like real DC, not like the White House is on fire and some muscular guy must like go on the ground and save us all. So the way you describe it, I think is like, yeah, it's like a very sort of insidery DC and not sort of what New Yorkers think DC is like. You could have set the book, just in Chicago or in like the default literary capital, New York, and you didn't do that. Why did you choose DC?
I will say I read that section basically so that I could utter the words red derby. So if you're hearing I was pandering to you, like, know that you were being pandered to.
That's good enough for me.
I love DC. I hate that the real DC doesn't appear in fiction. Dino Mengestu does it, Edward P. Jones, we talked about this. If he would come out of retirement, that would be so great. But mostly my DC is just not in books, and I hate that. I really wanted to make Short War a DC book, and this is actually also sort of the reason that it's important to me for the characters to be Jewish. I see the world through Jewish eyes. I see the world through DC eyes. Everywhere I go, I compare it to DC and find it tragically lacking and wanting. It's the city. That's why it's set here.
I didn't realize until I was done reading Short War that familial bonds would factor into it so prominently. I loved the way you explored complex relationships between children and their parents, between the people who gave birth to them, but also people who choose to take on the role of being a parental figure. And it seems like something you considered pretty seriously as you were writing the novel. Can you talk about that?
Yes. And first of all, everyone here definitely knows I have a baby. And as I was writing, I was sort of moving towards that in my own life. So I was really thinking a lot about parenthood, what I wanted parenthood to look like for me, about the kind of community I wanted around me as I became a mom. And so Nico, who comes up a couple of times in what I read, is Gabriel's best friend from childhood adolescence, and he's very, very, very present in Gabriel's daughter Nina's life, even though he lives in Chile and Nina lives in the United States. And I hope for that for my own daughter with my friends. Also, this audience is full of people who are my parents' friends and are like aunts and uncles to me. And having that kind of figure in the book, having Nico be that sort of figure for Nina, was was a relationship that's very important in my own life. That I hadn't really seen that in much fiction, and I wanted that there.
And seeing Nina, jump into the stepmother role wholeheartedly as well, and being so open to that as a pretty young person. I thought that was very powerful to include. I want to talk a little about craft. I want to talk a lot about craft. This is actually my favorite thing ever, but I will control myself. Okay, so books are obviously a massive, massive part of your life. In addition to being a writer, or a translator, and a critic, two hats which feel to me like it must give you some kind of literary superpower. You just know too much, so much.
I do know too much, that is real.
How have these other two roles influenced the way you write fiction, if at all?
I think translating makes me much more aware of the effect that word choice can have, and not just word choice. Are you contracting your verbs or not? How do you arrange your sentences? That stuff is really important in translation because it helps reproduce effects. And I think about it a lot more when I write because of translating. As far as criticism goes, I'm just constantly reading stuff I don't like and thinking about why I don't like it. I don't usually review books I don't like because it's boring. My husband has heard me say this 1,000 times, that something is bad and deserves to be panned, but I'm too bored by the thought of it to do it. And I think that all of that, mean, bad energy actually goes into my writing because I'm constantly thinking about the way a book let me down and how can I not let my reader down that way.
What are some of your literary pet peeves?
Oh, man. I hate books where people pretend politics don't exist, like I said. There's a trend lately, and this is actually my next book, which will be out in a couple of years, is very responsive to this. There's a trend recently of literary novels with female narrators who do not experience pleasure. They don't let themselves have fun. They don't usually like food. Their boyfriends are all these sort of paper doll types who have no personalities and they're bad in bed. And I hate that. I am so sick of reading just women who don't get to have any fun. And Nina, Nina's having a hard time in this book, but I really tried to have her have a lot of fun. There's a lot.
There was very good sex scene in there.
Yeah, and Nina
Yeah.
they were. My father was shaking his head right now. Yes, my father was upset. My brother was upset, but it was important to me to do that. Also, I have a vegan friend who read the book in a draft and was like, "Why is there so much steak eating?"
Argentina.
Yeah, and I wanted Nina to have fun in Argentina, so she eats steak. That's big. Yeah, big pet peeve. No fun for women.
Impossible burgers in Argentina. Okay, in writing Short Wars, did the ideas and themes come first, or did you start out with a plot and build around that?
Oh my god, the plot came absolutely last. My poor agent read so many just like deranged versions of this book. And it's so many ideas. I mean, I at first was like, I'm going to write a book about CIA intervention in all of Latin America from 1970 to 1990. I was also 22 when I decided this, and that was not great. So yeah, I had a lot of ideas that I really had to cut back to get to something that I could even give a plot to or create a plot for.
On writing, on like the writing process, I have another question. So some writers are like word vomiters, right? They just get 100,000 words down. They never read the last thing they wrote. It's just like full speed ahead, and then maybe they look back. And then others go chapter by chapter, and then I suppose there are people who do a mix of things. What was your approach to writing and finishing Short War?
Eternal. It was the eternal war. Basically, I try to write every single day, and I think right in between the two things you describe. I don't do serious, thoughtful edits until I have a full draft, but I also don't like to leave a bad sentence sitting. So I actually do just a lot of retyping. Like, any paragraph that I allow to be in my draft, I've probably written over, 3-4 times, trying to get it to sound nice, trying to get rid of anything stupid. One thing about being a critic, I think, is that it makes me very impatient with indulgence on the sentence level. Anything that's too flowery, I really don't have time for. And so I think a lot of my initial process is paring back and looking for a good voice, looking for good tone. And then once I have something to revise, I revise more substantially.
Mm-hmm. Are you a solitary writer, or do you show people as you go? Or do you wait till the end?
The answer to, as you started to ask this question, I was like, oh, no, my dog is always in the room with me. My dog is my muse. But no, I'm a little bit of a mix. I like to show people when I'm stuck, basically, or when I feel that I need another set of eyes to tell me what's wrong that I can't identify, or to sort of confirm an intuition. That's when I prefer to get feedback. I wrote a lot of short war during my PhD, which was a PhD in creative writing, so I was forced to show it to people more often than I would have, which was fine and good. And my professors were extremely helpful, but moving forward, I won't be doing quite so much of that, I think. I also trust myself more than I used to.
Yeah. And it can be distracting, being pulled in sort of too many directions as people look for different things.
Yes.
Definitely get that. I have one last question, and then the big surprise.
Excited.
Okay.
I'm scared.
Who are some of your literary influences or books that you admire?
Oh man, so many. I mean, my great friend Philip Roth. I love Philip Roth so much. I love Roberto Bolaño, one of the greatest Chilean writers ever. I had to steer away from that to make this book not just like a humiliating North American Bolaño knockoff. Like, there were some bad drafts that were kind of like that. Grace Paley is a big influence for me. Deborah Eisenberg, who wrote a lot about U.S. intervention in Central America. She's a big influence and role model. I love Rachel Kushner. She writes about political violence better than anyone. And while this book is not explicit, there's not political violence on the page, there's plenty of it off. So I was thinking about her a lot while I wrote.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to end with a round robin. You have like 3 seconds to answer each of my 10 questions.
Wait,
are you ready?
Surprise! I
I'm ready for Lily of this.
I love it.
I am having fun.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Okay.
Okay. Here we go. Writing stack or no writing stack?
Snack.
Favorite?
Yes. All. Tony's chocolate that I eat too quickly for other members of my household.
Okay, I like that. Very honest. Favorite place to write?
At my desk. I hate writing anywhere but at my desk in my house with my dog.
Handwritten draft or laptop?
Laptop, which is like scorching my eyeballs.
I know the struggle. Writing music or silence?
Silence, but silence like the sounds of my house, not AirPod silence.
Okay, so no soundtrack for Short War?
No, I'm trying. Yeah, I listened to some like Chilean, some of the Chilean rock that the characters in the beginning listened to, but that was like research, not writing music.
Okay, understood. All right, congratulations! You get offered a 6-part HBO series for Short War.
My dream.
Who plays Gabriel and who plays Nina?
Okay, so I have this deviant problem, which I'm going to tell you all about, which is that, some of you know this already, I believe that I look like Dustin Hoffman. No one does. But I do think that. So, Gabriel, I would like to be played by a 16-year-old Dustin Hoffman.
He was very hot at that age.
He was. In the right sort of size and structure. Nina, I think would have to be Alana Glazer. She'd have to sort of tone herself down, but she has the hair, and I think she has the energy.
And she has the potential. Okay. Hate read to the bitter end or do not finish?
Really depends. I think if I have feelings of spite that go with the hate, then I finish. If it's more boredom, if it's hate boredom, then I stop.
Last book to make you laugh.
Ooh.
Like out loud.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
It's hard for us.
That is hard. Can I actually give like an anti-answer?
Go for it.
Okay, Worry by Alexandra Tanner is supposed
I
to
just started it.
Don't stop. Put it down.
Why? It has made me laugh. Every page has made me laugh. I guess I'm just simple. I would make laugh before.
No, I mean.
It's your launch. No, it's your launch. You're allowed.
Yeah, I wanted that book to make me laugh, and it didn't. I think the real answer is probably actually a kid's book because I read so many kids' books.
Oh, they are fun. Yeah, if it's got great rhythm, anything's possible. Last book to make you cry.
Last book to make me cry. It was probably Family Happiness by Laurie Colwin, which I read about twice a year, and it makes me cry every single time.
Cool. I'll have to check it out.
It's so good.
Okay. Second to last question. Low stakes fuck, marry, kill. Literature edition. The M dash, the semicolon, exclamation mark.
Oh, kill the exclamation mark immediately. Fuck that semicolon, marry the M dash. I actually really love M dashes.
Great answer. Okay, last question. This is a very easy one. Favorite DC bookstore?
I like the original location of Politics and Prose. I do shout out also to my neighborhood store of loyalty and to Lost City, which hosted the party when the galleys came out.
Yes.
So those are my favorites.
I love loyalty as well. And Politics and Prose. That is it for my questions. I think we could open it up to the audience if you would like to walk up to the microphone, which is right there.
Vanessa, thank you so much. Those were terrific questions.
Hi, thank you so much for this. I'm so excited to read the book. So you talked a little bit about your translation practice and some of your literary loves. And as someone who probably has literary influences or books that they love, like Bolaño or probably others in Spanish, I was wondering if you felt like when you were writing this, if you felt the influence from books that you hadn't read in English or that you had enjoyed in a different context, in a different way that you felt the influence of books that you read in English or literature that you loved in a different moment or in a different time.
That's super interesting. I think that the answer is no, because I think about influence so much more in terms of ideas and characters and storytelling moves than I do in terms of sentences. With sentences, I'm just so picky because I'm so impatient with anything ornate that my own inner censor is really what influences me. And I think that that means that like intellectual influence is the same no matter what language the book is in when I read it. But I'm going to think about that more. I kind of hope that the answer I'm giving you now is wrong. I think it's right.
Thank you.
Thank you for kicking it off. Kicking off Q&A is the act of a saint.
I really loved the reading from the book. I wanted to know, the first time I saw the book was obviously a JPEG on the internet, and I've loved the art from the first second I saw it, so I'd love to hear the whole backstory of what it is and what you think about it in relation to the book.
May I suggest that you buy our questioner Kyle Chayka's books on design before you leave this store? So I really wanted this image on the cover. It's a drawing by the Uruguayan constructivist artist Joaquin Torres Garcia. It's ubiquitous in Uruguay. You see it everywhere. It's the flip America, the continent. And the little tagline that goes with it, which is not a drawing title, but I thought it was for many times, translates to "Our North is the South." And I did a lot of researching Latin American history from a Latin American perspective while I wrote this book, although I consider it a book about U.S. history. And I tried to keep in my head sort of the orientation of my North is the South. The telling that I trust is the telling of the people who had a dictatorship put into their country. Not the telling necessarily of the country that funded the dictatorship. So it was a little bit of a moral compass for me. And then Emily Mann, the cover designer, just did such a good job making it look cool. And I should say, Torres Garcia's estate gave it to my publisher for free, which was a really nice thing to do. Thank you to them.
I'm really super excited to hear more about the book and to know that Red Derby made it in. But my question is actually about your research trip to Chile and what approach you took when you went. I mean, that's a tall order for a visit to go and do as much research as you could, so I'm curious how you approached that.
So I had a longer relationship with Chile than one research trip. Luckily, that would have been so hard. So I studied abroad there in high school. I actually went to Pinochet's high school. It's a Catholic school. I think I was the only Jew who had ever been in there. And I have stayed in touch with my host family since then. I've been back to visit them a couple times. I also, in college, spent a semester studying history in Uruguay. The National University there has this really cool interdisciplinary center for comparative dictatorships. It has another name, but that's what it is. So I studied there. I went back there and got recommendations from my professors, talked to them, spent a whole day photocopying in the Uruguayan National Library. So it was, when I went to Chile to do research, it was actually sort of a pretty haphazard. I did talk my way into the high school that I had selected to be Gabriel's school. It was like Christmas Day or something, and I weaseled my way in with some very confused monks patiently following me around. But yeah, I was not very organized in my research travel. I was more organized in my reading.
Thank you.
Hi, Lily. Love the reading, and congratulations on this great success.
Thank you.
I just have a very simple empirical question. One of the books that about Chile that really affected me, and then a movie, was a story about Charles Foreman, and Costa Gravas is Missing, which I've seen many times, and that's my favorite political movie. And I wondered, by any chance, did that affect you at all?
I have the script for it on my research bookshelf. Costa Gravas is great.
I do too.
on your research bookshelf?
Yes, because I'm a screenwriter.
Yeah, he's so good. He's so good.
Yep, but I just was interested in that.
Yeah, I love that. I watched 3 Days of the Condor many times just for the Robert Redford vibes. Which the book doesn't have, to be clear, but I thought it would have been nice.
Thank you.
Hi, Lily. So on kind of the surface, at least, it feels like there are a number of kind of autobiographical elements to the book. And I'm curious, kind of as a writer and as you were going through the process of writing it, how you interacted with kind of your own lived experience and what you brought into that. And if there were ever any moments where you felt like you were almost taking too much from what your own experience was versus kind of the research or what you had in mind for the world that you were creating.
It's a really smart way to ask about autobiography, thank you. I think, honestly, I used the things that came from my own life. Either stuff like DC, where I had an agenda, wanted DC in fiction, or it was that I was trying to balance out the research because I did so much research. It gets nuts when you put too much research on the page, like it's bad. So I was trying to balance out that research with little details from my own life, or perhaps lifted from the life of someone in this room, many people in this room. I just like to steal little bits of life to bring myself closer to my material. Some stuff also, like there's a tannery in the book, which is based on Gutman Leather, the real tannery that my grandfather ran. That didn't need to be there especially, but Gutman doesn't exist anymore, and it felt nice for me to put a fictional Gutman in the book. There's no other reason. It sort of doesn't go deeper than my desire to. I should say I don't write about myself. It's not an accident that the 16-year-old boy in the book is closer to me than the 28-year-old woman.
Lily, I was curious to know about how you got started on Chile. I decided to go to Chile rather than Colombia to be in the Peace Corps in 1965, thanks to a book that I picked up at the Central Library then at Mount Vernon Square called Chile Land Society by George McBride. And I highly recommend it. I actually have a copy of it. The essence of it is so much about the peaceful transfer of power. Chile was truly a classic democracy, and to have what happened in 1973 was such a transgression. So my basic question is, how did you get started? What was your fascination with Chile?
So first of all, I see Bernard coming, which probably means we only have time for a couple more questions, so I will make this quick. And I'm going to put Richard, my history teacher, on blast now. I just went to Chile because I wanted to do a high school exchange somewhere Spanish-speaking, and that was where I wound up. And I didn't know that we had done a coup there, and I didn't know anything, basically. This is not all Richard's fault. This is all the U.S. curriculum, which doesn't include it. Kate, you should have taught me that in 5th grade, though. I see you. No, I couldn't believe I didn't know, and I got really obsessed with the fact that I didn't know, and that's how we love a return Peace Corps volunteer in my house. Peace Corps volunteer in my household. So thank you.
Okay, well, fascinating country, and I do recommend that book if you're curious in delving into the history.
Lily, I've known you since you were very young, and I'm just wondering, when did you first sort of know in your heart you wanted to be a writer, and what were the influences on that journey?
Oh man, I always wanted to be a writer, I think. I mean, I wanted to be a marine biologist because that was like what you wanted to be if you were a girl in the 90s. Please, everyone confirm. Yeah, I don't know why that was. But no, I always wanted to be a writer. I always existed much more in books and my imagination than in reality. I mean, I had such a supportive family, such a supportive school. Teachers all along the way encouraging me to write. That I always felt like it was attainable, which is so rare. It's so special for a writer to have that, and really, really rare, I think. I also, you guys mostly all know this, I'm not that good at a lot of things. Like, in the physical world, I am not great. So I didn't, I don't know what else I would have done. I would have figured it out, but, probably someone working right now remembers the time Pete Souza was signing his giant photo book and I knocked over an entire cart of those huge Pete Souza photo books of Obama, and, everyone thought that the store had been bombed because it was so loud. Liz, I know you remember when I did this. I'm not well suited to the world. I'm well suited to the page.
Congratulations, we're all so proud of you.
Thank you.
Thanks once again to Lily and Vanessa. Let's give them a round of applause. And since